Yeah. I think, can I just say that this film is...
No, you can't just say, because...
Hang on. Yeah, I've completely gone speechless. Unusual.
Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. This week you're going to hear a discussion that Mike Gordon-Shapiro and Antonia and I had about the wonderful sequel to Mary Poppins Returns. Enjoy. Mike, you were the most recent to see it, I think. Tell us your thoughts briefly in a nutshell.
Well, this movie really cements my fandom of Rob Marshall, who I think is one of the friends of musical theater in Hollywood who really understands what makes musicals work. I was previously very impressed by his take on Chicago and Into the Woods, both of which I thought were better than their stage source material. And big picture-wise here, I think the film is emotionally delightful. It's just a joy to watch. And I think the value of it spiritually and musically supersedes the value of it as a story. I think you just go in with this, you come out with a vision of a visualization of joy. And for me, that was the big takeaway, that and some lovely music. I think it manages to capture the spirit of the original without feeling like a rehash, which is a delicate balance to maintain.
What did you take home, Tonya?
I'm a big fan of Robert Marshall. I loved Chicago, the film, much more than the stage show, which is rare for me because usually I prefer the stage show a lot more. It is just joy personified, the whole thing from start to finish, and I cried like a baby for the whole of it. So.
2 minutes in, I believe you said.
Yeah, so as soon as you see the bird lady on the steps of St. Paul's, I was like, a mess.
What I loved about it, I'm a big Disney fan of Walt Disney himself and the whole history of it, and I loved how there were so many references in the film to whether it's the original Mary Poppins or whether it's the people involved with the film, for example, the paintings that were playing over the wonderful overture, which we very rarely see nowadays, were paintings done by the person who did the original Mary Poppins paintings that opened the film, and they found those and restored them, and in some cases people copied his style and did paintings in that style. It's a lovely homage to the film itself, and I'm probably in a better opportunity out of everyone in and virtually in the room that I've seen it twice. I went to the beautifully restored Odeon on Leicester Square and sat in lovely electronic reclining seats and watched the film again. Let's talk about the music. We got songs by Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman. A fact that I most liked about it was that they had to get approval from, is it Robert Sherman?
Richard Sherman.
Richard Sherman, I apologise. Had to get approval from Richard Sherman for every song they did, and he ticked the box on all of them personally. Did you get the feeling, Mike, that it was being passed down from one generation to another?
I do think Mark Shaman was the best choice in composer for this film, because I feel like when he's writing in this style, which is kind of Disney meets larger than life English music hall, I feel like it's very sincere, that it's his native language in many ways, whereas many composers might have had to adopt that language and ended up doing something that felt more pastiche. I think he really nailed the spirit of the songs, but managed to write something that felt original in this style rather than just writing a series of stylistic references, if that makes sense.
The songs, where they're placed in the film, very heavily mirrors the original film. But the songs themselves are not always exactly the same.
Yeah.
They're there for a similar purpose, but the songs aren't like... It's like, for example, the song that Mary Poppins sings to the children in the nursery as she's putting them to sleep isn't a direct copy of Feed the Birds. It's a completely new song.
I would say that song is more a tribute to the Stay Awake moment, which they had in the original film. It appears, I would say 1/3 into the film. I think Feed the Birds happens a lot later in the film musical. The one criticism people have said about this film is that it mirrors the structure of the original very much so. You got to think about P.L. Travers' source material and the fact that all her stories were structured similarly as well.
And Robert Marshall actually said that was a conscious decision from him, because that's Mary Poppins' magic. That's what that's what she does. She comes to the family, and this is the way she affects people. It has to be the same each time. The adventures don't have to be the same, but that is Mary Poppins.
But it seems to me, and this is the only flaw I have with it, it seems to me that is something they're almost defending. The fact that a cover is not... The cover is Jolly Holiday. The fact that Where the Lost Things Are is Stay Awake. The fact that the song about balloons at the end is Let's Go Fly a Kite. There's all these... You could literally put the two stories on top of each other, and I think the timeline and the messages the songs put across will match each other, but we don't mind or care because that's what Mary Poppins is. So
that's what I'm trying to say, basically.
Yeah. These are parallel songs for sure, but you would never think that one is a clone or imitation of the other.
No.
They serve the same purpose in the story. There's always a group of inexplicably cheerful labor class people singing and dancing. In the first film, it was chimney sweeps, and here we have the lamplighters. Even though it's essentially the same thing, it feels fresh and new at the same time. And you can imagine that Mary Poppins is thinking, well, I've got to give the similar lessons to the next generation of children in the movie. Why not give them the same tour of magic and imagination? And in parallel to that, you can imagine the filmmakers thinking the same thing to the children in the audience. We've got a formula that works. Let's vary it meaningfully, but give a similar experience.
Yeah, it's not like they've completely paralleled the original film and gone back, we're just going to do exactly the same thing with no originality. It's, like you say, fresh and new and original. It's got some
lovely moments. Now, Mike, you had you were in the enviable position of attending a Q&A with Emily Blunt, weren't you, when you saw it?
I was. It was all guild screening season in Los Angeles, which means that if you belong to any kind of entertainment industry, professional organization, you get to see all these free movies, often at the studios that filmed them. So in this case, I was at the Disney studio in Burbank at their on-campus theater, not too far away from where the original film was shot. And they wheeled out Emily Blunt for an interview afterwards. And strangely, this was an interlude between showing this movie and another Emily Blunt film immediately afterwards, which was, I think, A Quiet Place, if that's the name of her other current film. So yeah, she was very interesting from a description of process standpoint, how it felt for her to come and step into some very large shoes, come up with an interpretation of the character that felt recognizably like Mary Poppins without feeling like she was channeling somebody else's work. She discussed the interesting psychological shift she had to make between two very different films, emotionally speaking. It was a lot of fun.
What I loved about this film was that it was unashamedly a musical. And in the last couple of years, apart from Rob Marshall's input, we've seen films that are sort of musicals like La La Land and even The Greatest Showman, sort of giving us music video style presentations. And what I loved about this film is that it doesn't do that. I think we've said it before and we'll say it again. Disney are the biggest and longest producers of musicals in the world. They've been doing it since the 20s and they're still putting hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds into doing what is effectively, as Lin-Manuel Miranda, still can't say his name, called it, an old-fashioned musical. I think this film brought £95 million into the UK film industry because it was all done here, which is lovely. I absolutely adore the score that Mark Showman and Scott Whitman have done. I'm so annoyed, though, with the second I play it, the first rhyme is an absolute dud, and it's this massive shame. A beautiful song. Again, it's the Chim Chimney of this film. It's in 3/4. It's... the
Lovely London Sky.
London Town or whatever it's called,
and it gives you the impression that something's going to begin, just like Chimney.
And the lyric that bothers me, it's the first rhyme in the whole score, is Gone and Dawn, which work for Americans but not in a British accent, which is a massive shame.
Yeah, I think you can see why they've gone with that rhyme, but when you're writing for it's an English story and it's meant to be an English language and accent, it's not. Another
one is in a cover, not a cover, which is Cross and Sauce, which again work in an American accent.
Sauce, yeah.
Mike, you have thoughts on that, don't you?
I think certain inflections of American accent make cross and sauce rhyme. I think a New York accent might do that.
Cross and
I think
sauce.
By and large, the lyrics use perfect rhyme. It's just unfortunate that one of the first ones that we hear is a clunker in that respect. Yeah. But I think Scott Whitman is very talented. He mostly uses perfect rhyme. And he has a very good sense of the understanding of the rhythm of English language, which not all lyricists do.
And we have to say Mark Shaman as well, because he's co-lyricist on these songs as well.
True. The two of them collaborating together managed to set lyrics to music in a way that feels very natural, and the accents usually fall in the right place, and phrases like "nowhere to go but up" flow very, very naturally.
Yes.
And I have almost only good things to say about the lyrics.
You almost feel they were practicing for this with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I'm less familiar with that show, but the results here feel pretty polished.
Generally, the music is just so incredibly joyful. It was so nice to hear like old-fashioned traditional musical theatre songs.
And proper rhyming.
The songs actually felt like they evolved from the plot, which is it feels like a miracle. I mean, we had some really clever transitions from spoken dialogue to song. I mean, you have bits where, Mary Poppins, the music starts and she's still speaking, and then she sings like at the beginning of...
can you imagine that?
Can you imagine that? The conversation, when he's in the attic and he's singing to his wife, he opens the jewellery box and that becomes the music of the song. It's just such a smooth transition, and can you imagine that ends with a snap of a bag shutting and it's just done, and then you move on to the next thing. It's just so smooth. And
I think that's a deliberate. We go back to Rob Marshall here. He is the heralding this not at all groundbreaking style of storytelling through song. It's just something we haven't seen for such a long time because we've been treated to such delights as Greatest Showman and La La Land.
He's keeping that tradition alive though, and he's like the only director that's doing that. So
what I loved about the music was that we got very clever and subtle references to the original Mary Poppins score. Something I didn't notice for quite a while was that in The Lovely London Sky, the first shot of the Banks house we have The Life I Lead coming in, which was Mr. Banks' song in the original Mary Poppins film. We asked on Facebook what people think of Mary Poppins Returns, and we had some lovely feedback. We had a comment from someone whose name I'll tell you in a second that said, I wanted more of the original songs to be in the film. And I thought, well, why would they do that?
No, I would have found that quite strange and annoying, actually.
Yes.
I was thrilled that the majority of the music was incredibly new, but... in the score, again written by Mark Shaman, was a few nods to the original film, and they were. And when you hear them, I cried because you hear them and it's so poignant. But you don't need any more than that. That's just enough.
Barbara said, really enjoyed it, well made, but one little downside, I would have liked to have had one of the songs from the original, like Fly Your Kite, just to bring it together. But Fly Your Kite is in there. It's actually quotes.
Nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
And it's briefly referred to, yeah.
Yeah, and Mark Shaman actually quotes a melody, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, in Nowhere to Go But Up, but then it does come back in the orchestral background, so it is there. And it's lovely. We have Spoonful of Sugar, Perfect Nanny, the Supercalawattsits ends the orchestral suite, if you listen to that. So there's lots of little winks and nudges, and I think Mark Shaman probably had great fun.
Every time you hear a tiny bit of the original film, I don't know about anybody else, but I just felt so excited because it's so recognisable, but it's just enough.
In Nowhere to Go But Up, the line, if you see your reflection, your heart will take flight, is a direct quote, I think, from With Your Feet on the Ground, You're a Bird in Flight, from Let's Go Fly a Kite. Can you imagine that as a beautiful tribute to Bedknobs and Broomsticks?
So under the, what was it called?
Briny Sea.
Briny Sea was originally for Mary Poppins, but it didn't fit, did it?
No, sadly. But we now had this lovely tribute. Lots of Disney references in this film. There's a hidden Mickey in the bedroom. Theme park fans will get a kick out of that. The Big Ben sequence with the silhouette of Jack, played by Lin-Manuel Miranda, is a direct reference to Peter Pan. We had Falling Down the Rabbit Hole after one of the action sequences, and the bird lady on the steps of St. Paul's during the opening sequence is a lovely nod to the original film. I just think it's one of my favourite films of last year, we have to say that, oddly now. There's talk of a sequel now, which is bizarre. Oh. So I think we're going to have Mary Poppins set in the 50s and then the 60s, etc., etc.
Do you want to take issue with something Tanya said earlier? I don't think the songs are very functional with respect to the plot. I think the visual transition into the songs is, as was observed, excellent and smooth. But by and large, I think the songs often come across more as fantastic digressions that take us away from the story and don't really move things forward. Or when they do move things forward, it feels like it's in an indirect, kind of oblique way. I felt like sometimes, musically speaking, even though I loved every song, it almost felt like a song cycle rather than a book musical. What do you guys think?
I don't think so. I mean, you have the opening song, which has the same, we've talked about that, it sets the action up. You know where we are. You know, many musical films recently, they don't have the, here we are in London, this is where we are kind of story.
I want to ask Mike, though, how do you think the quality of the song use compares to the original?
I think it's directly parallel. I think the original had the same relationship of music and story, and that the music sometimes in a very general, indirect way might comment on the overall arc of the story, or there might be some emotional or spiritual lesson that you're supposed to take with you. There's a lot of music that's meant to encourage people to be imaginative in a general way, but that doesn't really bear upon the story of Michael Banks losing his home or sinking into despair, or any of the real stakes of the story.
And I think that's itself. What the other Mary Poppins musical, the stage show, does very well, was it took what are very good, fun message songs and really put drama behind them.
But you could argue a song like A Conversation is plot driven.
Yeah, we learn about the situation. Yeah. But I think a lot of the big numbers are just songs that are teaching you very important messages.
Yeah, but they don't feel like a song in there just for the sake of it, like Great Showman, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. They do evolve from the plot because a cover is not the book. Also, you say they're message songs, but it's still relevant to what's going on. Yeah. It's not just like a upbeat song for the sake of it, is what I'm saying. It's all part of the story. I feel like Mary's adventures with the children were a bit of a digression from the plot in places.
That's what Travers did, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you think of the very odd Meryl Streep cameo, Mike?
I love the song Turning Turtle. It's extremely catchy. It is stuck in my head at this very moment. Yeah. But I think you could yank it out of the film and no one would notice. I think it's what's sometimes called a charm song, just a cute moment that has no real forward motion. Yes, there's a little bit of talk of having to repair the magic porcelain so that they could perhaps sell it and drum up funds for mom and dad. But it was a complete digression as far as the story went.
It was a lesson song, just like the others. At the end of
Is it needed, though? Is it another lesson song just for the sake of having a lesson song?
No, because the children start saying maybe we should start thinking about things differently. And when they go to the bank, they decide to actually do something about the fact that they think their father's going to lose their house. It is a turning point for the children. They've witnessed how thinking differently can help you. Basically, they're all quite depressed about the fact that they're going to lose the house, but now they actually think, right, let's do something about it.
And that's what I loved about this film, was unlike the original, it had a villain in it. Tonya saw it first before I did, and you messaged me and said there is a villain in it, and that cheered me up. It was a surprise as to whom the villain was. And I like how the villain appears in the animated sequence, which we'll talk about in a bit. And that's something the original film didn't have.
Generally, I would say it's a bit darker than the original film in many aspects.
Well, everything's glummer and a bit sootier and a bit, because we're in the great slump.
Yeah. But the film, the original film touches upon some really important issues, like family's important and all that kind of stuff. But this film is quite heavy in the sense that, well, it's not heavy, it's the lightest film possibly that ever existed. The thing is, my problem with things like The Great Showman is the fact that it's kind of like everything is so feel good and everything is like in your face, over the top feel good, and makes you it kind of feels a bit sickly, whereas this film has moments of joy but sincere joy. It's sincere, but at the same time it's not afraid to shy away from themes like grief and death and all those kind of things. There's it's not frivolous, it's sincere, because there's that balance between quite heavy, dark subjects like death.
Yeah, it's about childhood as well, which is lovely.
Yeah.
Talk about the performances. Some people really hated Emily Blunt's interpretation of Mary Poppins. She's doing an extremely posh accent, so much so that she seems to pronounce very with a D. And it's a bit cartoonish, some people have said. I didn't mind it. The issue I have with the whole thing of someone else playing a character as iconic as Mary Poppins is that it's not Mary Poppins. It's someone else being Mary Poppins. And I think they could have done that it's her cousin or something a bit different.
There's only one Mary, dear.
Exactly. So why do we have two different versions of it?
Interestingly, in her interview, Emily Blunt said that she based her interpretation on a combination of Princess Margaret and Rosalind Russell's character from His Girl Friday.
Okay.
So that's what we're seeing in her particular persona.
I don't have a problem with her interpretation. I was very glad that she went with her own interpretation as opposed to doing an impression of Julie Andrews. I actually prefer this version of Mary. I'm not saying I prefer her performance, but this version of Mary, she's eccentric, incredibly rude,
Vain,
but recognisable. Like,
yes.
She's still recognisable as Mary Poppins.
Yes.
And I think that's an achievement, you know, to create something that's so familiar but so new at the same time. And I don't have a problem with her accent or of that at all. And it's so difficult for her because Julie Andrews' performance is iconic.
And Julie Andrews very politely declined the chance to appear in this film because she just wanted to hand the role down to Emily Blunt, which is very nice.
I will say one thing though. Everything was written down in her chest voice. Can you imagine that? It's mostly in the lower range. The lullaby that she sings to the children is very low. It's very low. And Julie Andrews had never sung anything that low.
She might nowadays.
Well, yeah, but not back in the 60s when she was playing Mary Poppins. There are a few moments where the music starts to go towards the head voice, and it sounds like she's belting a little bit, which is a little bit unusual for Mary Poppins. So I think they wrote for her voice type, and probably very aware that she couldn't reach all those high notes that Julie Andrews could do, so it was very conveniently written in her lower register. She performed it well, so I guess you can't complain too much.
Do you think that's a concession to modern musical sensibilities?
No, I don't think so. You know, they weren't making any concessions with regards to the music in anywhere else in the film. You know, like we say, they've done pretty much old-fashioned musical in style. I don't think that's that. I think that's Emily Blunt's voice. You can hear when she is going high, she needs to sing the higher notes in her chest voice. She can't sing them in her head voice. Yeah, I think, you know, the reason that the lullaby is in such a low key is because she can't sing incredibly high, but, you know.
She can still sing, though.
She can still sing, and she does a lovely job of the more sing-speaking sections, which are lovely. Lin-Manuel
Miranda is very, very good as Jack, I feel. Some people say he can't sing.
Have you heard how gorgeous his high notes are at the end of Lovely London Sky? It's so nice. I was like, no, not interested.
And I liked that we do have a Hamilton-esque rap, and the triplets that are accompany the end of that rap is a direct reference to the end of the, again, air quote, rap we have in Jolly Holiday in the original.
He managed to stay admirably in character and maintaining his quasi-accent throughout that entire number. But I feel like there was a moment or two where he was starting to slip into a little bit of a Hamilton groove or in the Heights kind of groove.
That was entirely Scott Whitman and Mark Shaman as well. Like, he didn't even consult on that. That was entirely their thing, and he was like, I just performed it. You would think that they would probably go, well, we have a rapper and someone who's a composer and a lyricist, maybe we'll ask him for, you know, what he thinks, blah blah blah. Nope, apparently it was all their thing, and he did nothing. He didn't even go, you know.
I think if Lin-Manuel Miranda had written it, there would have been 55,000 more words probably in that rap.
And more rhymes.
But speaking of Dick Van Dyke, he is in the film and does his own dancing, which is the most amazing achievement I think any of this whole film features, age 92.
92, I was about to say, how old is he?
He jumps on that table and he does a dance. And they said when he came to the set, you know, he gave his blessing and walked around the set, which they built Cherry Tree Lane at Shepperton Studios, of course, because, you know, Disney. Just to have him there involved in the film, it really did add a certain moment of magic. The moment I lost my shit, though, was when Angela Lansbury came on, because I forgot that she was in it. And I really do like that song, Nowhere to Go But Up, even though it's the same as Let's Go Fly a Kite, basically. But
Who cares?
Exactly.
Who cares, honestly?
It's so lovely. I just thought the cameos were nice.
I think everything was just so lovingly recreated. Everything. I mean, you've got people from the original film. You've got great cameos.
We had Jane Banks as well.
Yeah. So much thought behind the whole thing. It was just every element you could possibly think of, like the costumes, the details in the costumes.
Do you know the costumes for the whole animated sequence were drawn?
Yes, hand drawn. Yeah.
All the things we think are 3D textures in the costumes, like ruffles and folds. They're all drawn into the costume, which I think is amazing.
That's what I mean. Like, everything's so lovingly done. They even got animators out of retirement to do the animation for the animated sequences, like with the penguins and things like that.
This is what's, again, amazing about this film, to go back to how good Disney still are at making films, which brings me on to this next thing I want to mention. Disney are doing a lot of remakes at the moment, and Mike, I want to ask you this because you've been quiet for 5 minutes. Why wasn't this a remake?
From the standpoint of Disney's point of view, or...
From the standpoint of Disney are remaking every bloody film they've ever made, why do you think they decided to go with a sequel and not just a remake?
It's worth remembering that Disney isn't a person. It's not a single thought process or decision process, and I'd like to think that the director weighs in heavily on those decisions. Maybe I'm wrong. And I think Rob Marshall is someone whose instincts have generally been very good, as if you look at his film history in terms of what projects he's picked and how he's approached them. And I think this sequel that parallels the original film is much more valuable than a straight-up remake would have been, both in terms of giving a satisfying story and just avoiding a lot of grousing and complaining that everything was done wrong, possibly because when Disney does remakes, they do everything wrong. So this was a fresh slate with some binding qualities to the past, and I'd like to think that Rob Marshall was in charge of the decision and that it was the better decision.
Despite the fact that, like you say, it is closely paralleling the original film, it still has new things to say. It's not just the same thing rehashed again. There's so much that's new in it, like new points to be made about family and grief and how we cope with that when people are gone. Like, there's none of that in the original film. The other thing I'd just like to mention is the fact that this sequel has been in the sort of mind of Disney for a really long time. They wanted to do a sequel of this years and years ago. They wanted another sequel with Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke reprising the same roles, you know, like based on P.L. Travis's other books with the same cast, but P.L. Travers refused, and obviously we know that she died in the 90s, so I mean, they've been thinking about this for a really, really long time. Obviously, finally, they managed to get the rights to use some material from the other books. It's probably been in the works for so long. We
do get lots of nice nods to the other books. Meryl Streep's character is a male character in the stories, but they made her female for this, obviously, so Meryl Streep could play her.
And they do go into a bowl in one of the books.
Yes, and also one of the books is called Mary Poppins Closes the Door. We have reference to that.
Yeah.
In A Cover is Not a Cover, all the books... Sorry, A Cover is not the book. All the books on display are actual Mary Poppins books, and Nellie Rubina is one of the characters that features in the Mary Poppins stories. I still think Miss Andrews should have been in the film, because I think that would have been an extra level of threat, but maybe they keep that for the other musical of Mary Poppins. Let's just talk about Mary Poppins as a character to end this discussion. Is she a witch?
I think she's something of a high-functioning Slytherin, because she comes in, she's very narcissistic, and she withholds her powers at times when they would solve everybody's problems.
Yeah, why doesn't she just go up on the
God.
Big Ben?
Right, you two. Sometimes you have to let people work things out for themselves, right? When I'm working with children, I don't tell them everything they need to know. Sometimes they've got to come to a conclusion themselves. That's why she's so aloof. She doesn't just do things for them magically, because the thing is, she's going to leave. That's what she does. Mary Poppins flies through the window, she flies into people's lives, and she flies out of them again. The reason that she's so cold with the children often, I think, is because she doesn't want them to rely on her. You want the children to listen to you, respect you, learn from you, but you don't want them to rely on you, and I think that's the thing.
And there's she does it a lot in this film, as does Julie Andrews in the original. There's always a coy smile where you almost feel she's planned every single thing that is happening to these kids. I have seen people complaining at the Big Ben sequence, why doesn't she just, fly off and help as opposed to risking many, many lives of labourers?
Another related point is she has some kind of precognition and can see the future. So when she shows up, Michael Banks is on the verge of a nervous breakdown and financial ruin, and the family is about to be homeless. And all she has to do is say, the stock certificate is da-da-da-da-da. and
very short
everyone
film,
of it would kind of, she could continue to go on to school the children in lifted spirits and imagination, but without them being on the verge of being thrown into the streets. So
but I do think
she's a little selective in when she's using her magic powers.
When things are really bad, you really appreciate the things that are good. And she waltzed in and was basically like, right, you got your home back and everything's fine. They probably wouldn't appreciate the life lessons that she's trying to teach them.
I think they were very well-adjusted children. They were responsible. They were doing chores. I really didn't feel that they were as in dire need of life lessons as Michael and his sister were when they were kids.
Michael and Jane were unruly and quite cheeky and quite naughty, and Mary Poppins
certainly were in the stage show. They were less so in the film, but the stage show really brought out their brattishness.
That's the thing, yeah. And Mary Poppins teaches Michael and Jane, definitely teaches them different lessons. You kind of get the impression in the film that they were kind of left to their own devices because their mother was off being a suffragette and the father was working at the bank. Whereas, like you say, Annabelle, George and John are all quite well adjusted. But I think the thing that Mary Poppins teaches them is that it's about imagination, it's about having fun, because they've had to grow up too fast. You see that in the beginning open sequence of the film. They're doing the shopping, they're cleaning up the kitchen, which is overflooded, and she comes into their lives to teach them how to deal with life, but at the same time she also teaches them how to deal with grief. And even if she had found that certificate, it wouldn't bring their mother back. Like, she still is needed in their lives to teach them about how they deal with grief, and that's the main thing that they get from Mary Poppins.
Do you think she's evil?
No.
Do you think she meant, I'm here just to help the banks, children, and by doing that, I'm going to not reveal where the stock certificate is and hope that the banks will be able to repossess the home? You see what I'm going at here? Think it's possible?
I can't believe we're actually having this conversation where
I don't think that's
we're
what
diving deep into the psychological ethos behind Mary Poppins. But I think the fact that we are has proven that this film has had a wonderful effect on all of us. It's an utter joy to behold. It's certainly a film that will be more enjoyable in a cinema, and the cast recording is an absolute joy to listen to.
Do you think that it would be better in a cinema because it feels so theatrical?
I always feel that with musicals because it's more like being in a theatre. I can't really sit and watch film musicals at home.
I really wanted to applaud many, many times in this film.
Yeah,
actually felt
my audience did.
I was like, they didn't in mine, but
no. It also wasn't directed for moments to applaud, which Rob Marshall's always said is always awkward when you're doing film musicals, because you have the button at the end of at the end of the big songs where you often want to applaud, and how do you carry on? And I think that's what he did very well, especially at the end of Can You Imagine That, where the bag just does close shut at the end and they carry on.
There's one small detail in the story that I thought was very smart and charming and dramatically effective that I wanted to point out, and that was the consistent symbolism of the kite. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this in a non-spoilery way. The kite was emblematic of happiness and levity in the first film, since it was the focus of the final song. And here, it returns as a kind of recurring symbolism of hope. And if you think of the film broadly, the film is about hanging on to hope or not giving up to gloom and despair. And the opening song, Lovely London Town, speaks on that. And the dealing with grief issues address that topic as well. But the kite is formerly this bastion of hope and joy, which is now literally in tatters and discarded by Michael and pulled out of the trash by Georgie. And it symbolizes the kids clinging onto and bringing back the spirit of hope and joy, which I think is the lesson that Mary Poppins is trying to impart. And as the story progresses, it turns out that the kite has a practical function as well, which speaks to the idea that joy is important in our everyday lives, and it's not just icing on the cake. And this was a symbol that was carried throughout the entire film in a way that I thought was very clever and very meaningful. And in this way, I think the sequel was superior to the first film from a story standpoint.
Mary Poppins practically perfectly plucks the kite out of the sky. Like, she's the one that returns it to the children. Like, she's returning hope. Yeah, I like that.
And she says upon arrival, you nearly lost your kite.
Yeah, you nearly lost all your hope.
Yeah, that's a very good way of thinking about it. And the sequel will probably involve a dilapidated balloon.
It is just sheer joy, isn't it, from beginning to end? And there are so many people who have so many problems with this film. Apparently something about it being blatantly capitalist or something. I haven't followed it. I think if you start to look too deep into it, you're going to just lose all the joy.
Yeah, and we just discussed it for 40 minutes. It's a film that it is what it is. It's what Disney do best. It's what we need Disney to do. And they do it exceptionally well. And I love the fact that it was made in England, it was recorded at Abbey Road, it was a London Symphony Orchestra, it was all this wonderful... It's very, very British, and they absolutely got the tone perfect. And, massive thanks to Disney and Rob Marshall and John DeLuca and Mark and Scott for giving us a wonderful film at this very crap time of the world.
We really need that right now.
I agree with you on all your points. I think this movie was sincere. I think the emotional payload is its strength and essence. And I think it shows that Disney can continue the classic tradition without having to feel too postmodern and too contemporary, which can be true of some of their film remakes. So 2 thumbs up for me.
Mike, thank you very much for chatting to us about Mary Poppins Returns.
Thank you for having me, as always.
It's been very good.
Indeed,
Tonya. Thank you, Tonya, as well. You're practically perfect in every way.
When you try and put a posh accent on top of your already posh accent, it sounds hilarious.
I know. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. You can email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk. Listen to past episodes on iTunes and YouTube, and follow our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.